I'm delighted to have the chance to talk with you today, and what I'd like to talk about is the notion of the academic reviewer's persona and shadow, and I'd like to take a Jungian psychology perspective on these issues. The outline of what I would like to talk about is first I want to introduce the notion of a persona, then I'd like to introduce the notion of a shadow, and then take a social psychological perspective on the review process from a Jungian view. Then I'd like to talk about some notions of how to work with one's shadow in the academic review process, and finish with some ponderings about what all of this may mean in terms of academic reviewers and reviews. The notion of a persona is one of the most influential concepts developed by Carl Jung, an analytical psychologist. It is, for example, the basis of the Myers-Briggs typology inventory, which is perhaps the most influential instrument that's derived from the work of Carl Jung. The notion of a persona is that it is the self that one shows in public, and it derives from the Latin word for mask. So the idea of a persona is the self that we show in public, and it can be contrasted, that is, the persona can be contrasted with the shadow, which is that portion of the self that we seek to hide, deny, and repress. So the persona is the part of the self that we show, the shadow is the part of the self that we attempt to hide. But in analytic psychology, including that of Freud and Jung, the shadow can leak out. It can show itself in anger, in depression, in Freudian slips, in anxieties, notions such as that. So what might a social psychological view of the review process that integrates this Jungian perspective look like? Well, I want to offer a couple of propositions about that as a preliminary attempt to integrate these notions. One is that written and electronic personas, meaning the selves that we show in print and in electronic media, are going to be more negative than in-person personas. Why might that be the case? Well, written and e-communication removes verbal and nonverbal cues that communicate friendliness and likability. So, for example, you can't see me right now, but I have nice horizontal wrinkles which communicate friendliness on my forehead. My eyebrows are up. I'm smiling as I talk. So I'm attempting to communicate friendliness, but that is masked from you because you can't see my face right now. There are also compensating processes that have evolved in e-communication, for example, emoticons, but these are rarely used in professional communications like academic reviews, and so it's problematic, the potential for a more negative persona that the reviewer intends to be communicated to the person receiving the review. The second proposition that I'd like to advance is based in analytic psychology. And the notion is that reviewers show their shadows through the review process. The intent of reviews is primarily to criticize and critique academic work. And the notion here is that those who are unaware of their shadows will tend to project them, meaning that they will see them in other people. And the source for this argument is, again, analytic psychology, particularly that of Jung and Freud. So those who are unaware of their own shadow tend to project it more onto others. Next, I'd like to take up a potential example of the shadow as evidenced through the review process with the notion of review flaming. And the notion of flaming is that one shows one's anger in written and electronic communication. Here are some examples of actual academic reviews that may show some evidence of the reviewer's shadow. This paper is written for ignorant individuals with no knowledge of computers and accounting systems. Your paper is passé and naive. The paper is mostly unsubstantiated conjectures, and then a note that I received in a note to the editor which said, "I've repeatedly pointed out the author's stupidity to him, but he just doesn't get it." Well, those might be some examples where reviewers were unaware that they were projecting their own shadow onto someone else. Certainly these comments could be made in a form that's still respectful of the integrity and thoughtfulness of the writer. What might it mean to dance with one's shadow? Well, continuing from Proposition 2, the notion is that awareness of one's shadow lessens its influence and also decreases neuroticism, meaning anger, hostility, guilt, and depression. In addition, awareness of one's shadow is likely to increase psychological health. And finally, awareness of one's shadow is likely also to increase one's physical well-being. I'd like to conclude with some ponderings for those that do academic reviews. One is, what is your reviewer persona? What are you projecting to others? What are you communicating to others that you intend? What are you communicating to others that you perhaps do not intend? And perhaps the notion of making subconscious choices around what you choose to communicate to authors. Here is a painting by Pablo Picasso that hangs in the National Museum in Paris that is called The Shadow. Well, I enjoyed talking with you about this topic today, and I hope that this discussion was valuable to you. Thank you.